And like I said, anytime an exception is thrown this way, an exception object is created in memory. You can assign that exception object to a variable, and when you print that variable, you're basically printing out the message, the error message to the user. You can do that, or you can also write your own custom message. And so to do that, I'm going to wrap the try statement, or the try clause, or whatever you want to call it, or try statement, around any code that has the potential to raise an exception, right? And I'm going to have an except statement as well to basically type in what happens when there's an exception, right? You can think of it this way. You can think of it this way and say that try to run this line, right? Try to run this line, right? And then keep running the program except when there's an error. Print a message saying that there was an error opening the file. That's all I'm saying. Try to open this line, and if you can open the line, great. If you can't, okay, except when there's an error, with this line here, then print this message, there's an error opening the file. So let's try this. And now it says there's an error opening the file. It did that all right. See, it displayed the message all right. But when this was done, we were supposed to end the program. We weren't supposed to continue anything below it. But that's what happens the way we've constructed it. We are saying that if there's a problem with this, display this message. It did that all right. It told us there was an error opening the file. But the thing is, when it was done, you see the programs are read, line by line. And so it finished doing all of this, but it continued, right? And it's saying that, okay, hey, I don't know this numbers file because there's a problem opening this file. And so nothing was assigned to this variable. And so it's complaining that, hey, I don't know what this is. It's saying this numbers file is referenced before assignment. It's saying that I've used this file without storing anything in there, without assigning anything in there. I've referred to it without it being assigned anything. And so what I really wanted to do was, I wanted to, if there's an error, if there's an exception, just display this message and then stop the program. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an else statement here like this, and then I'll indent all of this block like that. So now what I'm saying is this: try to run this line, right? And then keep running the rest of the program, except when you have a problem with this line. If you have a problem with this line, then print this message, right? And then end the program. Else means that if there was no exception, then continue running the file. If there was no exception and you were able to open this file and store it here, then continue to run the rest of the file. So this means try to run this line, except when there's an error. When there's an error, display this message and then stop. Else, if there was no error, if there was no exception, then continue the rest of the code. So that's what it means. And so now when I run this, it just tells me there's an error opening the file. That's all. It just tells me there's an error opening the file and stops. But as soon as I fix this and I name it numbers.txt, it's same. I save it the same way as the name of the file, numbers.txt. Run this program. Now it tells me the numbers in the file sum up to 19, because it was able to assign numbers here. And so this except was skipped, and then there was no exception, and so the else part of the code will run because there was no exception here. If there's no exception, okay, else if there's no exception, then run this. But as soon as there's an exception, then display this message and then stop the program. And so when I change this back to, let's say, numbers.txt, run it, says there was an error opening the file. Now, this may not be helpful information, right? The user may want to know exactly what's wrong. And so, like I said, anytime an exception is thrown, an exception object is created in memory, right? Now, if you know the name of that particular exception, if we know that error that is happening here, right, we can assign the name of that exception to a variable. And when we print the variable, it's going to print the message, the error message. And so I happen to know that this type of error is an IO error. And so the way I assign an IO error to a variable is by saying except IO error as, and I'm going to create my own variable. I'm just going to come up with a name, and I'm going to call it IO error IO error exception, or I'll just say IO error, right? You can call it something, IO error. Yeah, that's it, IO error. This name can be anything. So all I'm saying is I happen to know this type of exception, right? Because I know the only exception that can result from this is an IO error. I'm thinking that way. And since I know that this is an IO error, because anytime an exception is thrown, because an object is created in memory, I am assigning that object to a variable IO error. And when I print this IO error, when I add it to the print statement, it prints out the message for me. And so I can decide to say there was an error opening the file, and I can continue printing information. Now I have, if like I said, if I print this exception object over here, if I print this object, when an exception object is created in memory, I've over here I've assigned it to a variable IO error, and when I print this IO error, right, it basically prints out the message for me, the error message. And so I can pass in IO error this way. So it's going to say there was an error opening the file, right? So I'm going to add a colon here, a colon, and then now it displays the message for me. When you assign the exception object to this variable, and when you print out the variable, it displays the message. So when I run this now, it tells me there was an error opening the file, error 2, no such file or directory, numbers.txt. Now, it's because I happen to know that this is an IO error. But what if you don't know the type of error that can result from the code that you've surrounded your try except statement with? What if you don't know? If you don't know, then you can, use the term exception, because you don't know. You know that it's an exception, but you don't know that the type of exception. And so you're saying that, okay, an exception can be thrown, right? And when it gets thrown, assign that exception, right? Before that, it used to be assign the IO error, right, exception, right, to this variable. But I'm saying that this time around, I'm saying, because I don't know the type of exception that can, there are so many types of exceptions, right? If you don't know the names, you can say, because you don't know the names of the exceptions, now you're saying that assign that exception. Now I'm using the keyword exception, capital letters, right? Capital E. I'm saying assign that exception to a variable. I'm going to call this variable error, right? Because I don't know the kind of exception. I'm just saying just assign that exception that's thrown, or that's assign that exception object that's created in memory to this variable. And so now when I print this error variable, right, it's going to display the particular message, right? And so yeah, I happen to know that it used to be an IO error, and that's why I type it here. But now let's say I don't know. I'm just saying accept exception as error. And so now display this error. And if I display this error variable, it displays the error message to me, basically. So when I run this now, see nothing, same thing happened, basically. The only difference is now I've said whatever exception that's thrown, just assign it to this variable, and then display it in print statements, and that basically displays the error message. And now when I fix this to the correct name of the file, which is numbers.txt, right, save this and run it. Now it says the numbers in the file sum up to 19. When I come and I add 5 to it, now you expect 24. Let's actually add 2 to it. That's 26. Let's add, let's say, 7 to it, and that should be 33, right? Save this, run this, and it says the numbers in the file sum up to 33. And so this is working. All right, so if you have any questions, please comments down below, and I'll do everything to respond to them. Thank you very much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time with the next program. All right then, bye-bye.